What's going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we're going to be diving into a couple more budget style decks. Just got to give you guys a couple more options than what I did in the previous video. If you haven't seen that video, there'll be a card probably somewhere here at the beginning. If you want to click that, go start off with those 5 decks. Those 5 decks I would also assume are going to, just on my basis of playing those over these, I would say overall are the better solid together, like put together decks of these budget style decks, which is like the synergies just overall seem better. Nothing less to say, like depending on how many wild cards and stuff like that, maybe you just don't have enough to purchase into a lot of Ikoria and things of a lot of the newness. These decks are also like just there, they use a lot more of the base cards that you may have, as well as maybe not needing to go in and invest in a whole bunch of new cards if you don't have the wild cards and or the currency to do so. So enough of that being said, guys, let's just dive into the different decks, break them down, kind of give you the lists, and enjoy. So the first deck up is an aggro based deck. It's a Golgari aggro deck. The overall style of this deck is pretty straightforward. There's nothing really too extreme. I would say it's, if anything, it's an improvement maybe over the Golgari deck the game gives you right off the bat when you finish the starter deck area. But overall, this deck is pretty straightforward. It's pretty aggressive. The goal is just to hit your opponent in the face as much as possible. Other side note, I did add in, some rare cards to these decks, so they're not as cheap as just being commons and uncommons. So just a little like thing out there. So some of the decks you may see will have some rares, some rares, and maybe some mythics. But I know if you complete all the mastery levels, you do get some bonus mythics and rare cards, as well as if you use any codes that if you do a quick Google search to get free packs for every set. If you just search like MTG arena codes, you'll find codes to get packs, which will get you more wild cards as you open up packs. So enough of that said, let's break down the deck kind of based on how it plays, what it does, and go through. So first off, we have the Wildwood Tracker. Whenever it attacks or blocks, if you control another non-human creature, it gets +1/+1. So pretty much it's a 1-drop that gets +1/+1 as long as it attacks with another creature that's not human. I believe this deck doesn't play a single human creature, so it's always going to be at least a 2/2 if it's blocking with, attacking with something else, or even blocking. Paradise Druid for the ramp. It's also great because as long as you don't tap it, it has hexproof, so your opponents can't target it, and then it gives you like that little bonus ramp of when you want to maybe tap it down to actually play something. Collision Colossus. It deals 6 damage to target creature with flying, but really the Colossus is the ability that we're going to use here just because it pumps up one of our creatures and gives it trample, so it's kind of like maybe like a finisher, as if like you're swinging in big and then just gonna swing over the top of the Colossus. Dimir's Ambush is another solid card, gives our creature +1/+1, as well as that creature deals damage to target creature opponent controls. It's not like fighting, so they're not going to do damage to each other. This is going to do direct damage to that other creature, and then the creature, hopefully, if you're targeting something, is going to die in the process. Great card also because it gives a +1/+1 counter. I mean, the sorcery speed is okay, so you have to play on your turn, but it's a great card for its value. Then you got the Zerta Goblin, another solid card. Riot is an interesting ability. Riot's one of those things that when creatures enter the battlefield, we can choose to put a +1/+1 counter or haste on it. If you want to be super aggressive, you can go super haste, or if you want to get a little bit bigger, you can always give it a +1/+1 counter. Also a very solid option. After that, we got Annex, the Harden in the Forge. Great card. It has devotion for red. Every time we have a red creature on the battlefield or a red devotion counter on the battlefield, besides him or including himself, you get +1 to his power. So majority of our cards, other than maybe the early drops, actually play red devotion in their mana costs. So in general, he'll at least see a 2/3 that if you drop him and he's the only red card on the battlefield. If not, he may be 3/3, 4/3, so on and so forth. And when we get to this later part of the deck, you'll see that we have a card that pretty much has 4 devotion counters for red and or green. So he'll definitely be really big in the late game. Also, whenever a creature dies, whenever a non-token creature dies, create a 1/1 red satyr token on the battlefield. This creature can't block, but if it had 4 power greater, it creates 2 tokens instead. So solid token to, if they have a board wipe, you get tokens regardless, so they can't just they have to either exile him or bounce him back to your hand is the only real play to not get tokens back from the Annex. Bone Crusher Giant is the one rare card that we have in the deck. We play 4 of. It has an adventure and a creature ability. The adventure ability is to do damage to any target, and it can't be prevented, and the creature ability costs 3 and it's a 4/3, and if our opponents try to target it with a spell, it deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. even if we target our own Bone Crusher Giant, we'll actually take 2 in the process. So just as a heads up, just in case, you will take 2 damage if you decide to put a Colossus maybe on your own Bone Crusher. But a very solid 4/3 with that effect, as well as having a burn card maybe to do some spot removal early. Then you got Gruul the Generous, 3 cost, 3/3. Each non-human creature we control enters battlefield additional +1/+1 counter on it. So when it comes back to like our things with Riot, or those cards will come back onto the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. Very, very solid addition to that, as well as you know, just in general, just giving things additional +1/+1 counters is great. Then we got the Rampage Smasher. This is pretty much like our big creature, I would say. It's not anything super duper impressive. It's a 4 cost 5/5, and it can't be blocked by knights or walls. So in case my opponent's playing something more control, it can just walk over walls and stuff like that. As well as if maybe you're playing against a mono red deck that plays for champions and stuff, it can't be blocked by those. So decently solid card. You know, it's just for value for the devotion to bump up Annex. And overall, you just want to be super aggressive. Like, the point is to kind of be done by turn 5, hopefully, or at least to have your opponent really, really low, just so that you can swing out into them. The land base is pretty straightforward. We play 24 lands, 10 mountains, 10 forests, and then 4 rugged highlands. Overall, the deck is pretty solid. Our curve is pretty good in the sense that we average about 2.7 or so, around like a little over 2.5, 3 costs is our average for our deck. 28 creatures, 8 instances, 4 sorceries, and then 24 lands, and that creates the deck. So if you like this deck, you may want to upgrade it and maybe continue playing it as you do. I actually have a list of things that we can add into the deck if we want to get rid of things. So let me just do that real quick, and we'll get right back to this, the updated version of this deck. So going back to the deck, we added in our upgrades. So here's what we did. We took out our 4 rugged highlands. We put in our stomping grounds into the deck. Then we took out our collision and colossuses, and then we put in ember cleaves to replace. So we took out 4 of those, put 4 of those. Same thing with the everything pretty much is an equal 4-to-4 exchange. So then next we got rid of the tracker at the 1 cost. So we put in the Pell Collectors. Then we got rid of the Rampage Smashers. We put in the Questing Beasts. Got rid of the Grim Gullies, and we put in the Gruul Spellbreakers. And then we got rid of all the annexes, and then we actually put in 2 Gallias because it has haste, and its ability is actually very, very strong. As well as we put in 2 Colossuses just as a good enchantment creature. It actually targets your opponent's cards from a graveyard. Gives you either ramp and or you gain 2 life and deals 2 damage to each opponent. So it's a very solid enchantment, as well as has indestructible, and its devotion is red and green, is less than 7. It is in the creature, but our deck pretty much plays, you know, stuff that has devotion in it. So there's a good chance by mid game we're gonna have this out on the board as well as a creature, and it's a good solid 4/5 indestructible creature that we can swing into our opponent that has a bonus effect. Overall, the deck gets maybe a little bit more aggressive. Oh, I also forgot that we put Questing Beasts, and we got rid of Rampage Smashers as well. Another very solid card because he can't be chumped by 1/1s or anything less than 2. He can't be chumped by. So someone's gonna have to block with him with big creatures if they want to get rid of him. And any damage that we dealt by creatures we control can't be prevented, so they can't just like fog the board. And if he deals damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that player controls. So if Questing Beast deals 4 all the way into that player's face, it's going to deal 4 to their planeswalker if they have 1 out on the board. So it's also a very, very strong card. What I would recommend here is probably, you know, start small. We added in a mixture of rares and mythics, so that is the one thing. So you got 2 different currencies that you're working with. Mythic currency is a little bit harder, so maybe you can start with some rares and then work your way to the mythics and so on and so forth. I would probably focus on maybe 1 card at a time. So if you want to maybe get the Pell Collectors for the early game and then work your way up and, you know, get like Gallias or Bone Crushers was already in, maybe the Spellbreakers, Colossuses. The other thing to note here too is that some of the cards are a little bit older, so just a heads up, FYI, that just in case if you're newer to the game, you're not really 100% sure, some cards rotate out in October, so just a heads up, some of the cards from the older sets that have been out for a while, like our Pell Collector and stuff like that, may be rotating out. So if you also are unsure if you want to really bring something in like that, maybe want to focus in with like things like Questing Beasts, Colossuses, Bone Crusher Giant's also another solid card. Gallia is good, just as a FYI, just in case if you're unsure. Also, Embercleave is good to go. with all that being said, I would say this is still a pretty solid deck. It's still pretty competitive, especially if you're a newer player to the meta. Is it the best deck in the meta? Probably not, but it will definitely get you a good head start in the meta and probably will get you some wins to get you up the rank and ladder. All right, next deck up is going to be Mono Black Devotion. It's a pretty much straightforward deck. The goal of this deck is to just get up as much Devotion as possible, drop like a Great Merchant, do a bunch of damage, and also, you know, play a bunch of things that will annoy your opponent just to get yourself up to that high. This is a deck that's been around. I think, you know, every meta has a Mono Black deck. This is like the budget version, so we're not playing really any rares here. I don't think, just looking at this without even highlighting anything, there is no rares here. I think everything here is uncommons and commons, so just the FYI, if you're low on currency, this may be a better option. So the first card up is we're going to play Cauldron Familiar. Yes, it's kind of also like a Cat Oven deck in case you played against a couple of those. Cat is just very strong because whenever it comes onto the battlefield, you do 1 damage to your opponent, loses 1 life, we gain 1 life. And if we sacrifice a food token, we get to return it from our graveyard back onto the battlefield. Mix that with Witch's Oven, you sacrifice it to Witch's Oven, goes to the graveyard, sacrifice that food token, cat comes back up, does the effect again. One of the things that gets very annoying, people get annoyed with it, but it's a good effect, and it's very good, especially in like a very budget-friendly deck. Whisper Squad's another solid card because it's a 1-cost 1/1, and we can tap 2, and we can search our library for another Whisper Squad and get it onto battlefield tapped. In this version, it's not the most important, like it's not as crazy, like it doesn't have the priest to kind of, you know, make it super duper effective, but just getting more bodies on the battlefield to get more devotion is just a very solid thing to do, and it's one cost 1 black card, so definitely good. Which is something, like I said before, we can sacrifice a creature, which more than likely will be Cauldron Familiar, and we get a food token, which we can use to gain life if we need to, if we're getting a little bit low, as well as bring our cat back in case we want to bring it back from the graveyard. Temur, just because devotion is good and he becomes a very solid blocker with our high devotion. Everything, he gets 1 toughness for every devotion we have to black, so he could get very big very early, just because a lot of our cards at least play 1, 2, if not more devotion in their costs. And we can also tap 2, exile target 2 cards from graveyards. You may gain them 1 life if a creature was exiled this way. So if our opponent's playing things that go to the graveyard or things like that, we can target their graveyard and get rid of specific cards that we don't want to see come back on the battlefield, like especially if they have escape costs and things like that. Yoriak's Fenlurker is another card that's also super annoying, I think, for our opponents, because it's a 2-cost 1/1 that when it enters the battlefield, each opponent exiles a card from their hand. The reason why we play it is the 1/1's not really the thing, but the exile is good and it has a 2 devotion cost, so it definitely builds up the devotion very early. Bloodthirsty Aerialist is another good card. It's in, I believe, the standard like mono black deck that you get when you first start the game. Whenever we gain 1 life, we get a +1/+1 counter on it. We have ways to gain life in this deck, like our Cauldron Familiar and things like that. So we have ways to get this big pretty quickly, and has flying, so it flies over a majority of creatures. Then this is a card from Ikoria. It's a pretty solid card. It's a 3-cost 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, we get to choose 2 different counters to put on it from Menace, Death Touch, and Lifelink. So maybe our opponent's playing very like small creatures or not many creatures. We can put Menace on it and then give it Lifelink or Death Touch. Lifelink would be good in case you think that we want to gain some life, especially with the Bloodthirsty Aerialist. Put Menace on it as well. They can't block it. Death Touch is maybe one of those things maybe we want to put on it in case maybe we're behind and our opponent has a big creature on the battlefield and we want to block into it, so we can Death Touch it regardless of it having enough toughness. Very solid card for a 3-cost. I think that's a very solid ability too. Strike to the Underworld is another card. 2's okay. Maybe we could go to 4 and drop something else, but pretty much it's a destroy target creature, and its spell costs X less to cast, where X is our devotion to black. On turn 2, after we play like a Temur or a Yoriak's Fenlurker, this thing already costs us 2 mana for an instant speed destroy target creature. Very solid deck. Really only can be seen in a mono black, that's because you have to get at least 2 devotion on the battlefield, but solid card to put in this deck for spot removal. And then you got the Deathless Knight. It's a 4/2 with haste, and every time we gain life for the first time a turn, we get to return him back from the graveyard to our hand. It's a 4/2 solid body with 4 devotion and haste. Definitely solid option, just to kind of, you know, have a recurrent effect from our graveyard back to our hand, as well as a big body and 4 devotion. This is the card that will make this deck just that much better. It's Great Merchant. Pretty much he enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is our devotion to black, and then we gain life to equal to the life lost this way. So pretty much this is our finisher. The upgraded version plays like a little bit of a combo that we can recur him multiple times, so that we pretty much do this effect multiple times, which will pretty much end the game for our opponent, which will make them end up scooping. Other cards we have are 22 Swamps and 2 Witch's Cottages, just for the ability to return target creature card from our graveyard to the top of our library. So if we want to get, maybe they made us discard or a Grey Merchant died, and we just want to get another one, we could put a Grey Merchant back on top of our library and probably end the game there. So going over this deck is pretty straightforward. You're just going to play a lot of these drops, get a lot of devotion on the board, hopefully get to turn 5, drop Grey Merchant, and hopefully make your opponent scoop. Couple minor upgrades we could do to this deck will come up in like 2 seconds. Let me just do a couple edits and I will get the deck into its upgraded form so we can all kind of break it down and go over it. Alright, now going back to the deck, we did a couple upgrades to the deck. We actually dropped the Deathless Knights that we added in Fiend Artisan. It's a new card from Ikoria. It's a very solid card because it actually gains +1/+1 for each creature card in our graveyard, as well as it has the ability to tap X and 1 green or black, and we can sacrifice a creature. We can search our library for a creature card with converted cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield and shuffle our library. Can only activate it as a sorcery, but if we get to the late game and we want to get that Nightmare Shepherd that we may have not drawn yet, we can always sacrifice a creature, get that Nightmare Shepherd, search for another one, get the trigger, search for one, get the trigger, and possibly end the game. The other thing too here is one of the other cards we got is we actually added in Nightmare Shepherd, and we dropped the Bloody Aerialist. This is one of those cards that will make certain cards reoccur. So if we like say sacrifice a Nightmare Shepherd to go search for a Nightmare Shepherd to get another one on the battlefield, the one that died is that we can actually exile another non-token creature that died, and we get to put a token of that creature onto the battlefield, except for it's a 1/1 nightmare in addition to its other types. So pretty much you just reoccurred multiple Nightmare Shepherds. Though the one thing is, I think out of this you'll lose a little bit of your devotion, but you'll get copies of things. We can make copies of Fenlurker, make our opponent exile cards from their hand. We could also, make copies of Araya, things like that, which we haven't gone over yet, just a heads up. The other thing too is we added a Murderous Rider. It's another adventure card that has 2 abilities, 3 costs, destroy target creature or planeswalker. You lose 2 life, but it's a 3 cost destroy target creature or planeswalker, which is cool because it's like a target planeswalker destroy card, as well as a 2/3 body with lifelink, and whenever it dies we put it on the bottom of our library instead of putting it in our graveyard, so there's a chance that we could always redraw it again later if we can shuffle our library. We got rid of Whisper Squads for these. That does get a little bit more expensive than what it was prior, but we kind of gained a little bit more devotion in the process of doing that, just as a FYI. Then we actually got rid of our Grim Dancers to add in Araya, which is another good card for mono black, just because one, it's a 3 devotion cost card, playing all black mana, so it's no problem. But whenever another black creature enters the battlefield under our control, each opponent loses 1 life, we gain 1 life. Add that with the Cauldron Familiar, add that with anything that's going to come back from the Nightmare Shepherd, and we can actually sacrifice another black creature and draw a card, which we could reoccur Nightmare Shepherd if we really wanted to. Then on top of it, we added in a Castle of Loch Thwain, which is pretty much one of the best draw cards for a mono black deck. We draw a card and then we lose life equals the number of cards on our hand. If we're really just digging and looking for something, we can always tap 3, draw a card, lose a life, maybe to look for that Grey Merchant, Nightmare Shepherd, an answer for something our opponent's playing. Overall, this deck is pretty solid. It's a pretty fun deck, especially when you're on a budget. It is a little cost heavy just because, like I said, we're adding in some rares and mythics. I mean, really the only mythic I think we added in is the Fiend Artisan. We don't have to find any special lands, so that's always good. Majority of the cards we're adding are all newer cards, so you're not going to get burned that when certain things cycle out. The Yarix Fenlurker is maybe the only thing that cycles out when M20 goes. Everything else is actually pretty good to go, so this deck really won't lose much in October when everything cycles out. Now onto the next deck, we'll break that down and move on. So this next deck up is another fun little synergized deck that pretty much plays everything except for I think 1 card in the deck is actually an elemental. So it's Temur Elementals. It's a deck that you may have seen like a more competitive, aggressive, deck in the meta, but this is like a deck that is actually more aggressive with creatures, and the goal here is to play just a bunch of creatures and then swing into our opponent's face, as well as getting a couple of procs in the process, just playing elementals with various things. It has a little bit of mutated in it, so it has a little bit of everything for everybody. But overall the deck is pretty straightforward. We play the 4 of the Scorch Bitters, which is a very solid card, especially for mono red. We add them in here because it's Elemental Lizard, and whenever it attacks, it deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker it's attacking, so we can target we get 1 point of damage through regardless of it becoming blocked, but it's a very at least 2 damage return if it's unblocked. Shocks for some spot removal, just because shock, why not? Arable Grazer, it's a beast. It's our only, I think, non-elemental in our deck. Has reach for 0/3 body, as well as the ability to actually take a land card from our hand, put it on the battlefield tapped to kind of like get a little bit extra ramp. So in turn 1, you play Arable Grazer, you get an additional land. By turn 2, you can play a 3rd land, and you're already at turn 3 mana. So that's pretty solid. Healer of the Glade look good for some extra life gain, giving us the ability to gain 3 life for 1. It could also, play to trigger some of our later card abilities based on elementals. Leighton Storm King, it's a 2-cost, blue red 2/2 flyer haste, just another good solid elemental to kind of swing in, get some quick damage. Creepin Trailblazer, 2-cost 2/2. Other elementals we control get +1/+0. So this is like our elemental lord. It'll give our elementals just that 1 extra power to get more damage, and we tap for it and give it +1/+1 till end of turn for each elemental we control. So maybe this in a perfect scenario, if our opponent's low, we can, and they don't block this, we can tap for, and we can, hopefully get some extra damage to maybe finish off our opponent. Clock and Seer, just for the 3-cost 2/1 flying elemental, and the ability when it comes to the battlefield, we get to draw a card, so some card draw is always good. Risen Reef is kind of like the thing that helps us like super duper ramp in this deck, just because it's a 3-cost elemental that whenever Risen Reef or another elemental is in the battlefield, we get to look at the top library of our look at the top card of our library. If it's a land card, we can put it in our battlefield tapped. If we don't, we can put it into our hand, so it's like a draw card, or put a land into our hand, play a lot of elementals, so this effect will go off multiple times a turn, possibly, especially in the early game or the later game if we have a lot of low drops. The other thing too is if we stack these, we get the effect multiple times, so it's a good way to draw through our deck to get 2 more cards. We play Chandra's Novice Pyromancer because it gives also our elementals +2/+0. We can minus it to give us 2 red mana, or we can -2 and make it do 2 damage to any target. But more so, we're just going to give it to buff our elementals. It's kind of also like a rally the wings kind of thing, where everything gets +2/+0 and swing in for big damage. Maybe our opponent won't be expecting it. Scamper and Scorcher, this is actually a pretty cool card because when it enters battlefield, create 2 1/1 red elemental tokens. Elementals we control gain haste until end of turn, so pretty much if we play this and maybe some other things in all in one turn, all our elementals will gain haste and we can swing in, as well as this will trigger our Risen Reef 3 times, just because we get 2 2 1/1 elementals plus itself, so that's 3 triggers from the Risen Reef. So definitely good triggers. Yet again, it's a very solid card. Just get make our board wider, swing in on our opponent, and hopefully finish him off by this board. Excuse me. Next up is the Parcel Beast. It's a 4-cost 2/4, but it has mutated 2. We're probably more than likely going to play this with the 2 mutate, but the ability here is actually very interesting. Just like the Risen Reef, it actually has the ability to tap 1, tap itself, and then you can look at the top of our library. If it's a lane card, we get to put it on the battlefield. If we don't, we get to put it into our hand, so it's another card to draw. The goal of this deck is probably to not really get into the late game. This is at least a mid game at most. Our curve is very low, so board wipes and things like that will kind of like set us back a little bit, but we have a little bit of speed to actually kind of get our board back together. For lands, we play 22 lands, which is a little bit low. We could probably bump it up a little bit, but a lot of, like I said, our deck is very low cost. We only average around 2.3 cost for mana. Parcel Beast gives a little bit of that effect just on the basis of it has a 4 cost, but really we're only going to play for the mutate to make one of our smaller elementals bigger. We can also make our Grazer also a 2/4 body instead of a 2/3 body with reach, just as another possibility. But overall the deck is fairly low cost, so we don't really need to do anything to the lands, but it's 5 islands, 6 mountains, 5 forests, some Swiftwater Cliffs, some Rugged Highlands, and some Thorwind Falls, just to balance out the different colors that we do play in the deck. It's a deck pretty straightforward. I'm going to do the upgrades real quick, and we're going to break it down, kind of see what we could do to actually upgrade it overall. So I mean, this deck is pretty straightforward. I didn't want to do anything too crazy when it came to the upgrades, but so all I did really is I added in Ikoria just for the basis of its companion ability, just given our all our decks are elementals, beasts, cats, nightmares, dinosaurs, whatsoever. It's a 3/2 vigilance, but whenever a creature we control that's a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, beast gets +1/+1 and is vigilance, so pretty much it just gives all our creatures that you see in our deck additional +1/+1 and vigilance, which is definitely very, very solid, especially when you can attack and don't have to type your creatures down, do damage to your opponent's face. That didn't take any additional adds, so we didn't actually drop anything in the process. Other than that, I really didn't do too much other than taking out our other Chandras and adding in this Chandra. It has a 0 cost ability that pretty much creates 2/1/1 red elemental tokens. They gain haste, and we get to sacrifice them, which also will trigger our Risen Reef counters, as well as we can -2. We can take target instant or sorcery, which I don't think we play any at all. Maybe a shock. I think that's the only instant or sorcery we play. Maybe a shock, get it back to our, get the play from our graveyard, and then exile it after we're done playing it. I mean, if we want to maybe kill off our opponent, we can tap 0 and give each red planeswalker control a loyalty counter, which more than likely is something we're not going to do. We're going to just be super aggressive, always probably make an elemental swinging into our opponent's face. The only other thing I did is I got rid of the Parcel Beast and I added an Omnas, which is another elemental. It's pretty much the elemental god, I guess. When he enters the battlefield, we get to deal damage to any target equal to the number of elementals we control. We play a whole bunch of elementals, so it's more than likely going to do at least 3, 4, maybe more damage depending on when he comes in and how many elementals are out. And then whenever a land enters our battlefield in our control, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental we control. If we have 8 or more lands, draw a card. So if we get to the later game, we have a lot of lands out, we'll draw cards. If Risen Reef is cranking, we'll have a lot of lands out, maybe before even turn 8, so that's more cards. Other than that, all I did here is I just tweaked some of the lands, as I realized I didn't add in 2 and I kept in 2 of the uncommon ones. So I dropped an island, a mountain, a forest. I added in 2 steam vents, 2 stomping grounds, 2 breeding pools, and 3 Ikoria triomes. You could probably drop more, get more of these aggressive lands in if you want to, you know, shock them in instead of paying life. And drop more of your basics. I decided just to do this, just to do a one, you know, pretty much a 1-for-1. Got rid of all the uncommon, the tapped lands that come into play tapped. So that's the only thing. It depends on how aggressive you want to get with the mana base. You can always tweak it to what you feel like is working. But this is pretty much Temur Elementals. It's pretty solid. Fun little elemental deck that has a lot of things that trigger with a lot of things. So definitely a fun deck to play as well if you want to be a little bit aggressive with a little bit more flavor than just like playing mono red or something like that. So the next deck up is going to be a Golgari Adventures blend of a deck. It, for the most part, is like a mono black deck with a little bit of splash of green just for the Edgewall Innkeeper. But overall, this deck is pretty straightforward in the sense of how it works. So pretty much it is actually like a knight deck as well. So pretty much this deck is a knight deck. So everything in our deck other than Innkeeper himself is a knight in its creature type. So we play in 4 of the Falamir Knights. We can tap 3, we can draw a card and lose a life, or we can play it for its 1/1 body with Death Touch, which is a good blocker, especially if they have big creatures they don't want to swing into this. Edgewall Innkeeper, if we ever cast a creature spell that has Adventure, we get to draw a card. It doesn't need to have gone to the Adventure first, so we get to play it regardless of us playing for its Adventure. Heartless Act for some spot removal, or removing 3 +1/+1 like +1/+1 counters from a creature is always good, or counters in general if they have the Lifelink Menace, any of those kind of counters. Order at Midnight, we can always get target creature card back from our graveyard back to our hand, or we tap it for its 2 and have a 2/2 flyer, but the only thing is it can't block. It's good for its first ability, just getting things back from our graveyard in case things go there. Smitten Swordsmaster is a fun card for this deck because it's a 1-cost sorcery. We gain X life and our opponents lose X life, where X is the number of knights we control. So the goal here is to get as many creatures out before we play its sorcery's cost, and it's also itself is a 2/1 human knight with lifelink, so it definitely is a solid little body just to put on the battlefield. Lucky Clover, because we want that ability of our Sword Master to go off multiple times whenever we cast an adventure card, regardless of it's a Sword Master. Any of our adventure cards we cast, insert sorcery spells, copy it, you may choose a new target for that copy. So pretty much what happens here is we play like a Smitten Swords Master, where our opponent loses X life, we gain X life equal to the number of knights we control. It then makes an additional copy, so that spell goes off twice. If we stack multiples on the board, more than just one, we'll get multiple copies of these spells, doing multiples of these effects at our opponent. If we have a lot of knights out, we can almost, you know, take our opponent down. If we have like 8 or more knights, we can take our opponent down in like 1 turn from a Smitten Swords Master. Then we have the Midnight Reaper. It's a good zombie knight as well. Whenever a non-token we control dies, Midnight Reaper does 1 damage to us, and we get to draw a card, so some card draw with a little bit of kickback because we're going to take some damage. If we gain some life in the process, we'll be okay, and hopefully we won't die from this. Murderous Rider is a kind of an aggressive kill spell. It was in another deck I think we went over already. Pretty much Murderous Rider is a 2/3 body, cost 3. It also has the adventure side, which is a 3-cost destroy target creature, planeswalker, we lose 2 life. Great spot removal, especially for planeswalkers or things our opponents are casting. That with the Lucky Clover, we can do this multiple times, though we're going to take multiple 2 points of damage every time we copy the spell, but we can take out two or more creatures, especially if we have Lucky Clovers out. Deathless Knight is a fun card to pretty much yet again from the deck before. It comes back from the graveyard, but every time we gain life and it comes back to our hands, a 4/2 haster with 4 devotion. Pretty solid card. 10 swamps, 10 forests, 4 jungle hollows. Pretty straightforward deck. The goal here is to do things, make the Lucky Clover go off in that part, get cards from the Edgewall Keeper, draw through our deck, and hopefully kill our opponent by playing all the knights and then this Smitten Swordsmaster with copies of its ability to do X amount of damage to our opponent. Let's do the upgrades, kind of see where this deck gets changed, and then we'll kind of break it down. So we made the changes to the deck. Overall, we actually added in more green cards, which is just 1 additional green card. But overall, the deck hasn't changed really too much. We'll break it down, go over each thing. So pretty much what we did here is we added in Knights of the Ebon Legion. We took out our Heartless Axe, so we got a little bit more aggressive because we added in a 1-cost 1/2 body, but it has the ability every time our opponent, at the end of a step, if opponent lost 4 more life, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. We can also tap 3 and give a +3/+3 and Death Touch, so it becomes a decent blocker as well as it growing. It's also a knight, so it's like helps our effect of just doing Smitten Swordmaster damage to our opponent's face. Next up is we added in the Overgrown Tombs, just a solid rare land that has both types on it. We got rid of our Jungle Hollows, so pretty much a 1-for-1, just like all the other decks we've kind of going over already. After that, we added in the Lovestruck Beast, and we took out the Deathless Knights. Pretty much a Lovestruck Beast is another solid card. We can tap it for 1, create a 1/1 white human creature token. I know it's a white creature token, but it's a solid ability. Add that with Lucky Clover, we get multiple tokens, and then we can drop him for 3. It's a 3/3, or it's a 3-cost 5/5. The only thing is he can't attack unless we have a 1/1. A lot of our cards in our library are 1/1, so it's fine. But it's a solid card for like the ability and the cost that we get out of it. After that, we put in 2 Castle Lochthwains and just took out 2 swamps, just a 1-for-1 yet again, with the ability to tap 3, tap it, draw a card, and then we lose life. We didn't put in as many as our mono black deck that we went over before, just for the basis of we have the Edgewall Innkeepers. We don't need to hopefully draw through that many cards to get the answers we need. But overall, this deck is yet again another solid deck. I did actually play this very early when I start making a lot of Magic content. I may post a little clip thingy here if you want to watch that video. It's kind of older, but I mean, pretty much this is the deck that we played in that video. It was also before Ikoria came out, so it's playing more so with the last set before this one. But overall, it's a fun deck to play with, like, you know, it's cool to see triggers happen, things like that. You know, it's one of those things that I actually enjoy about Magic, when you see things pop up and trigger happen. So yeah, great deck to possibly play, especially for the cost. I mean, this one doesn't add in a lot of rares in that point. I mean, I think it's like 16 rares in total, or 14 rares in total. So nothing that's super duper expensive, and it's only rares, there's no mythics, so definitely a little bit cheaper on that side of the wild cards, especially if you don't have many. So the next deck up is another deck that I believe has a couple of rares in it. I do apologize, but I think it only has 4 of the Slither Wisp that came out in Ikoria, so that's the only thing that you may have to figure out what you're going to do instead. I may try to figure something out and maybe post it in the description below, or maybe just add another list that maybe has something out. I would just say maybe swap it, add something else that has flash, would be the best option. But the Slither Wisp ability is actually very strong. But overall, the deck is pretty straightforward. This is a deck that plays everything on your opponent's turn. The goal here is to kind of react to what your opponent's doing by playing things. For the most part, we play our creatures on their turn, we play our spells on their turn. Things benefit from us playing things on our opponent's turn, and our goal is to pretty much annoy our opponent by either interacting with stuff that they're playing, and or putting creatures on the board on their turn, and then being able to swing immediately with them on our turn. So we start off with 4 Spectral Sailors. It's a pretty solid 1-cost 1/1 flash flyer. Has the ability to tap 4, draw a card. Drawing cards is a great ability to have in these decks, especially when there's not actually a lot of draw cards in our deck, so definitely a good card to have. Next up is Brineborn Cutthroat. It's another card that benefits from us playing cards on our opponent's turn. It's a flash 2-drop 2/1. Whenever we cast a spell during our opponent's turn, it gets a +1/+1 counter. It gets very big very quickly, especially when we draw very flash heavy hands. Next up is Omen of the Sea. Yet again, another flash card. When Omen of the Sea enters the battlefield, we can scry to then draw cards. We look at the top 2, figure out which one we maybe want to keep. If we don't want to keep, we either put one on top, put one on the bottom, put both on top, and anywhere we want, and then draw a card, and then we can sacrifice it for 3, and we have to scry 2, so we get to do it again later if we want to kind of like try to look for something very specific to maybe close out the game. Quench is another card we play. Counter target spell unless control phase 2. It's good early game counter magic. I mean, hopefully not trying to get to the late game. Quench becomes kind of useless very late, especially if our opponent has a lot of lands, but it's a good solid spell for 2. Counter target spell, any spell. Starlight Mantle is a good flash enchantment aura. Enchanted creature we control enters the battlefield. Enchanted creature is hexproof until end turn. Enchanted creature is +1/+1. So pretty much this is maybe our opponent's casting a burn on one of our Brimon Cutthroats. We put this on it at flash speed, gets +1/+1, and that now our creature has flash. So our creature now has hexproof. So pretty much they would have to react to us playing this. Pretty much it would avoid the first initial shock, and then maybe at that point they don't have a spell to do anything to prevent us from playing this. And it has flash, so it's always good to play it whenever. Heartless Act, you know, some spot removal. Spot removal is always good. You can always destroy target creature, no counters on it, remove 3 counters from target creature. So if we're playing a mirror matchup, maybe you can always remove 3 counters from a Brineborn Cutthroat, something like that. Cunning Nightbonder is a good card for this deck because it's a flash card for 2. Also 2/2 spells with flash we cast cost 1 less. So all that stuff you see in the beginning of it, other than maybe the Heartless Act and I believe the Quench, all that can be now 1 cost. Some of our later cards I think are all just double mana, so that stuff stays the same. Next up is Neutralize, just for a solid counter spell for 3. And we can cycle as well. Slitherwisp is like the rare card that we're playing. It's 4 copies of flash. Whenever we cast another spell that has flash, we get to draw a card and each opponent loses 1 life. So this is like that card that kind of helps close out the game. The other thing that's great about it is that we don't have to play it during our opponent's turn. We can just play it whenever. As long as the card just says the word flash on it, we get to have this effect. So definitely solid. 24 lands, 10 islands, 10 swamps, and 4 dismal backwaters. Definitely a very solid deck. Very aggressive, I would say, is the way you want to play. It's very aggro heavy. It does have counters, but you want to play more aggressive with it than maybe play more wait and kind of wait and see. It's not like one of those decks that's trying to get to the late game. It's one of the ones that want to counter your opponent's early game and kind of attack them through it. Now let's do the little minor upgrades and tweaks to this one. This isn't the tweaks I'm doing here are I'll actually just probably go to the deck I played in my Dimir Flash deck that I actually have on the channel. It may not be 1-for-1, just as a FYI. This is just more of a budget friendly. I'm going to show you my version, so if it does look a little different, it's missing some things, it's more so because of what I maybe added and moved around compared to maybe this list here. So this is my Dimir Flash deck. It's pretty solid in what it has in the list. It is interesting on kind of compared to where the other one is. It's not as flash heavy, I would say, compared to the first list. We play 4 Knight of the Ebon Legions because it's a 1/2 1 body. Whenever our opponent gets done 4 more life in a turn, it's +1/+1 counter, and we can give it Death Touch. Wag Symbiote, just for its 2 cost. Each creature we control with Mutate costs 1 less to cost, and when we cast a creature card with Mutate, we get to draw a card and discard a card. So we want to draw into things. We added in Blacklands Paragon because it's a 3/1 flash card. Whenever Blacklands Paragon enters the battlefield, target knight gains Death Touch and lifelink on the end of turn. So we kind of like flash this in, block with maybe one of the little small guys, give it lifelink and Death Touch, kill off maybe a big guy, or if we just want to get that additional lifelink and gain some life, we can give it to himself too. So we can flash him in, give him lifelink and Death Touch, and pretty much block, gain life, and also kill off the thing. Also, we can flash it in just because it's a 3/1, get that extra damage in. We dropped the kind of Night Bonder. We have only 3 in here, but it's still a solid card. Added in Brazen Borrowers is because it's a very good card. Its main creature ability has flash and flying, can only block creatures with flying. Its first ability though is a bounce card that pretty much returns target permanent opponent controls back to their hand. So definitely very, very good. Your opponent plays something, bounce it back to their hand, they have to either play it again on that same turn, or they may have tapped all their mana to play it the first time and they get annoyed in that sense. We added some Sea Dasher octopuses here, just on the basis of the ability. 1, it has flash. 2, it's a 3-drop 2/2, or we can mutate it for 2. If we have the Poliwag Symbiote out, it costs 1 to mutate, and whenever a creature deals damage, that player draws a card. So definitely very, very good. We can always put it on maybe our Spectral Sailors, depending on how you tweak the deck. These are some extra cards that you can always change up. Next up, we added in the Dirge Bats. Dirge Bat's another solid card. It's a 4-drop 3/3 flash flyer. Whenever this creature mutates, we have to destroy target creature or planeswalker opponent controls. So definitely very, very solid. It's like a destroy creature spell built into a creature. You could always pay the 6 mana if we have the Poliwag Symbiote. Both abilities cost 1 less, so it's either 3-cost creature or 5-cost mutate, but we can do that flash speed. Definitely very, very solid. It is a little bit aggressive, but you can always maybe take out the Heartless Axe to do this, because then it can target anything no matter what the counters are on it. Other thing I added into the deck in my version is I added Instable's Hemophage, just because it's a 4-cost 3/3 body with Death Touch. Also, we can mutate it for 3. Polywog Symbiote makes this cost cheaper, but whenever this creature mutates, each opponent loses X life. You gain X life for X the number of times this creature is mutated, so it's a good way to gain some life, make your opponent lose some life. Has Death Touch. Good target maybe for a Dirge Bat, or vice versa. We can target a Dirge Bat that we may have flashed in with this and make our opponent kill 2 of their creatures, and then make our opponent lose 2 life, and we gain 2 life. Another card good to add is a Pouncing Shore Shark. It's a cool little like flash body here thing that pretty much it's a 4-cost mutate or 5-cost normal card, and whenever this creature mutates, we may return target creature opponent controls to its hand. So pretty much yet again, it's another card that bounces a card back to our opponent's hand. And yet again, if we play it at the end of their turn or during their combat, they can't play anything, you know, to pretty much, they can't play it back maybe because they may have spent their mana, but just a good way to bounce things back to our opponent's hands, just annoy them a little bit more. I also added Stone Cold Serpents just because there's a lot of multicolor. Just like look at this deck, there's multicolor spells in a lot of decks, especially for multicolor. Has Reach, as Trample. Maybe we play it in the later game when we have a ton of mana. It pretty much gets X+1/+1 counters on it for whatever we pay for X. So it's a, if it's a 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth, it'll have X amount of those counters on it. Definitely very, very solid. 9 islands, 7 swamps, add in some watery graves. So, and then we add in some fabled passages just to search in case we need to fix our mana for any reason. Definitely a very solid deck to play. It's very fun to play. It does annoy your opponent because I'm sure if you play against a flash deck, having to see what your opponent's going to play on your turn and thinking that they're most likely playing counters is kind of annoying. This deck is probably a little bit more aggressive. We don't really play any counters in here. I mean, you could always add in some counters, take some things out that you don't want. Maybe you don't want Instable's Hemophage as a thing, and maybe you want to put some counters in. It's up to you kind of where you want to tweak, but this is just my version I ran. It's definitely very, very fun. Yet again, I did a video on this on the channel. There'll be a card somewhere here if you want to take a look at that. But that is it for this deck. So in closing, I mean, pretty much this is just another list of more budget-friendly decks that maybe you're looking to play in the meta currently. I know the standard meta is kind of meh at the moment, so it is kind of like, do I really want to play Magic at the moment in the standard meta? It's always fun, especially in the budget meta, to kind of like build and kind of like figure out ways to get around certain meta cards. And I mean, people always say that when you play a budget style deck, you get matched up against people who play that type of deck as well, so you're not playing against people who are playing like super duper meta decks. I don't really know. I played a little bit of both here and there, but it's always fun to just play something that's a little bit off meta that's still kind of like cohesive and synergistic, that is still fun to play. With that being said, guys, I mean, I hope you like this video. I may have went a little bit long on this one. I do apologize, but if you want to see more videos, hit that subscribe button. If you want to, you know, maybe post a maybe if you wanted to post a deck that you've played, maybe leave it down in the comments below. I'll also be listing all these decks in the description, so if you want to, you know, copy any of these decks into Magic the Gathering Arena and play for yourself, or just kind of like slowly build into one of these different decks, links will be there to do that. That being said, I will see you later.